Welcome to Armchair Expat, the podcast meant to get you out of your lazy boy and into your new life abroad. I'm Shannon Acton, founder of Bargain Homes Abroad, and I'm riding shotgun as we chase the dream of life beyond borders. Each episode, we'll hear stories from people who've left their comfort zone to explore the world. They'll share their highs, their lows, and their in-betweens, all meant to lovingly light a fire under your bum, so you can stop dreaming about it and start living it. So if you're stuck in your comfy recliner, scrolling through dreamy destinations, wondering what if, it's time to swap that raggedy old armchair for a one-way ticket. Let's freaking go, people. Today on the Armchair Expat podcast, I'm joined by Arielle Tucker, founding partner of Connected Financial Planning and host of the Passport to Wealth podcast. Arielle specializes in cross-border financial and tax planning for U.S. expats, helping globally mobile families make smart decisions as they build a life abroad. Originally from upstate New York, she's spent more than a decade living and working across Europe and now lives just outside Zurich with her husband and 2 children. In our conversation, Arielle shares her own expat journey, from the early dream of living overseas to the realities of starting over in Switzerland and Germany, to building a career that supports others navigating international life. She's honest, funny, and incredibly insightful about what it really takes to move, adapt, and thrive abroad. Let's jump in. But first, let's hear from this episode's sponsor, MoneyCorp. When you're planning a move abroad, figuring out how to move your money is one of those practical details that can really make or break the experience. If you're buying a home overseas or just setting up daily life, you can't afford delays, bad rates, or unexpected fees. That's why I always point people to MoneyCorp. They've been doing this for over 40 years, and they really get the expat experience. You're not just a number in the system. You can talk to a real person who will help you figure out the best way to transfer your money, whether it's a one-time lump sum or regular monthly payments. And the best part? They consistently offer better rates than the banks. So you're not losing money just to move your money. It's easy, it's free, and you can set up your account right now using the link in the show notes. Don't let money transfers be the hardest part of your move. MoneyCorp makes it simple. Hello, Arielle. Welcome to the Armchair Expat podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
It must be a little bit different being on the other side of the microphone, right?
It is. I'm in the hot seat today, and I have to answer all the questions. So thank you so much for all the thoughtful preparation to hopefully make this a smooth conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just start with where you're from, a little bit about your background, and we'll get into your journey abroad.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Rochester, New York. So that's Western New York for anyone who's looking at a map of the United States. And I currently live just outside of Zurich, Switzerland. And I've been in Zurich now for about 3 years. Before that, I was in Germany. Before that, we were in Zurich. And before that, we were in Boston. We've been moving around, hopping around, trying to find like our perfect spot for a while now.
Did you always have a dream to move abroad when you were young, growing up in Rochester?
Yes. I think there was like something seriously wrong with me as a child because I remember being so incredibly upset and disappointed with my parents when I realized they weren't going to send me to the UK for boarding school, which I think is just like, it was the most Delulu thing ever. And this was before Harry Potter came out. Like Harry Potter wasn't a thing. So I don't know. I had somehow got this idea about boarding school and moving away and experiencing a different culture, like from a very young age. So like, I would say like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I remember I had a little purse and I always had like a British flag on it. I was just like, I need to go and find my people. I just knew the US was not it for me. And so became this like adventure of like, okay, how do I get out? And really my first opportunity to travel was in high school. We had, you could go join the Latin club and then you could go to Italy. And I was like, I'll join the Latin club if I can go to Italy. And I remember, it was my senior year of high school and just showing up in Italy and being like, wow, this reality looks very different than Western New York. And it kind of opened my mind to this idea of like, you can really truly choose your own reality. Like there are all these different universes and you can go and find another one if you're not like loving the one you're in.
Okay. So after that high school experience, what was your path to moving abroad? Like did you purposely plan it after that experience or
Yeah, so I did Italy, then I went off to university, and I really wanted to, like, study and focus on, like, international business, and I wanted to do study abroad in school, and I remember our college had a program where you could go and study in the UK for 1 semester. It was $30,000 back in 2005. I was like, "This is insane." I had a small college, budget, and I was like, "This is gonna take such a huge portion of my budget and potentially put me into debt. I'm not going to do that." I was already ahead in school with like AP and college classes that I had done in college. So I ended up just taking a semester off because I was like, well, I'm going to graduate early anyways. And then just backpacking Europe. And I think I did that with like $5,000 of savings instead of the 30,000 semester fee. So that was like my way to like hack it because I was always pretty budget savvy. Like I was like, I'm not going to go into debt for this adventure, but I know I need to have that adventure. Spent a lot of time in Germany. Funny enough, I was like, I hated Germany. I was like, this is like my least favorite country, which is
Mm.
a country I've now like gone back and lived in. Now I live in German speaking Switzerland. But I just knew there was something about how people were living abroad that I was so drawn to. It was it was a different pace of life. In the US, we have that I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy. And that just repels me so much. I'm a very authentic person. I crave deep relationships with people. I crave community with people. And I just always felt this like pull of like kind of growing up in suburbia and just being like, oh, I do not fit in this place. So I need to go find the place that I fit into.
I think a lot of people feel that way. You're definitely not alone. So how did you make it happen? Walk us through your first move.
So after I finished like the backpacking, I got married pretty young. I found like my dream husband in college. I got really, really lucky. Married a great guy. We graduated, got married, moved to Boston, and we were settling into like a really comfortable life of upper class suburbia in Boston. And I could see our life. It was like a nice house, and then a Cape house, and then 2 cars, and 2.5 kids. And I hated my life. And I was only 24 at that point. We had no children. I
Hmm.
was just like, I could see the path so clearly. And I was like, this is not it for me. Like, I am feeling like we're checking all the boxes for what everyone else defines as success. And I'm feeling so unfulfilled. And so my husband at that point was thinking about, does he want to go to school and start a brewery or did he want to do a PhD? And I was like, well, why don't we look at the PhD option? And we started comparing different schools in the US and we were living in Boston. So we was looking at MIT. And then somehow he came across this school in Switzerland, which is called ETH, and it's a technical university. It's one of the top universities in the world. He ended up going on a Swiss National Science Foundation, and I was able to become the trailing spouse. And I think that's really important to highlight. A lot of people are like, oh, I want to go and like have your experience. It's like, well, my experience was a trailing spouse of a student to start off with. Okay. That is like
Mhm.
not a glamorous life to start off with. But financially, we had run the numbers and he had compared like different top universities in the US. US programs were longer and they paid like their stipends were like half as much as the Swiss program. So I was like, so Switzerland's going to pay us more and they're going to have a shorter time period. We'll be able to do your PhD in like 5 or 6 years. From a monetary decision, it would like made perfect sense for us to move abroad. He and I had met like when I was on my way to Germany and he was coming back from Germany. So we both just were like really interested in different cultures and kind of getting out of the US. So it really, really worked for us. I happened to land in Switzerland in 2011, and I was lucky enough to have a spousal visa that allowed me to work because I think it's important,
Okay.
again, to highlight that not all spousal visas give you a right to work. So my visa, married to a student, allowed me to work from the first day we were there. I was able to find a job. And at the time we landed in Switzerland, COVID was blowing up. So think back to 2010, 2011. We had all the secret Swiss bank accounts that were like coming to light. Everyone's hiding money in Switzerland. All the big four, the banks, everyone was looking for people who understood the US tax code in Switzerland. And there weren't that many. And I had just happened to do some volunteer experience in college, working with low income individuals on tax prep. So I had seen a 1040, I had seen, a Schedule C, I had seen these like really basic tax returns. I'd written my senior thesis on a tax topic. And so all of a sudden I had all of these firms that were offering me jobs
Mm.
and just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right experience. So it just kind of got me into PwC in Zurich. And once I was there, I just like was soaking up all this information, right? We were doing international tax cases, global mobility cases. And it was a completely different world that I had seen, right? And as we went through and we're doing tax work, I started to realize like we're talking to all of these executives who are clearly making a lot of money, have a lot of money, and we're always looking backwards. How do we start to look forwards? And again, this is all timing and luck because my manager ended up being on secondment from the Boston office, and she was a CFP. She was a certified financial planner. And she was like, well, Arielle, you would make a great CFP. You should kind of explore, what being a CFP looks like. So the rest of our time in Switzerland, I stayed, it was always on the tax side. So actually preparing tax returns for expats, which was, I think, such an important base, right? To understand. Like if you can understand tax, that is a puzzle that most people cannot wrap their head around. And that has just kind of continued to open up so many doors for me. So that was kind of like our first real like long-term stint abroad.
Okay. So when you first moved abroad, was it all that you expected it to be? How did you find community? Obviously, you had a job, so you probably had kind of a built-in PhD students. But I'm curious how you approached really settling into Switzerland the first time around.
Yeah. So I was so depressed when we first came. So
Mm.
he had an office and lab mates, and he had a place to go every day, all day long. I did not. I had to like fill my days. And I remember kind of having this like paralysis in the beginning of not feeling like I could even leave my apartment. Like I I think about this all the time. Like we build cages around ourselves and we're the ones who actually hold the key. And I just had to like force myself to make coffee dates. And I remember I joined the American Women's Club, and I would just kind of like go and just like meet random people who were also just meeting random people to just kind of like pass the day. We joined a running club. I did all these things to try to get involved, to try to like give myself a routine, because especially when you first move, it's just so overwhelming. Like everything is different. Going to the grocery store is different. You have to like navigate government bureaucracy that's in a different language. And you've like all the rules that you knew and understood no longer apply. You don't understand the rules and you're just constantly in like the state of like overwhelm. So I think forcing myself to leave the apartment, like step one, like that was really good. And we've moved abroad a number of times since. We've moved, internationally within Europe now a few times. It's so much easier because I know, okay, first thing we need to do is find our people. Find our people. And I would say it takes like a year. It really takes like a year to find
Mm.
your people. You'll find people like day one, but to find the people you really want to connect with long term, I feel like it takes at least a year.
And what made you make that change? Like you said, you were really depressed and weren't leaving the apartment. Like, what was the push to do that? Did your husband kind of help you with that? Or was that just more like waking up one day and saying, okay, I got to do something about the
Yeah.
situation because
So
I'm
I
not
think
happy?
at that point, I was like, I am an outgoing person. I love connecting with people. It was just a paralysis at that time of like fear. Like,
Mm.
am I gonna go out and someone's gonna yell at me in German and I'm not gonna understand? And like it was this kind of like now. So I had to be so miserable where I was like, okay, I'm now ready to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable and putting myself out there. And I would say like there was probably 2 weeks of watching, 16 and Pregnant in German dubbed in English, that until like I got to that place where I was like, okay, I am now ready to walk out this front door and, leave myself from this prison that I'm creating for myself.
What were some of the biggest surprises you encountered your first time abroad? What were kind of reality versus what your expectations were?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was so many things. So, especially moving from the US, like we were living in Boston right before we moved. So, we had kind of access to everything at our doorstep all the time, 24/7, right? And so now we are moving, you know, 4,000 miles away from family, friends. We don't know anyone. I remember we showed up, like our flight landed on a public holiday, which means there's no grocery stores open. And I remember just like the whole shock of like, wait, like how are we going to buy food on like this first day? Or another thing we did was we had exchanged a bunch of money. I think we had like 10,000, Swiss francs that we had exchanged in the US and we were going to bring over, and that was going to pay for, our deposit and all the stuff for our apartment. We opened a bank account. We put all $10,000 or 10,000 francs into that bank account. And then we were like, oh, wait, we're going to need some money for our first deposit. Okay, can we take out 2,000 francs for our deposit? No, you are now, this cash is locked for 3 days and you can't like get out the money that you literally just handed us. Like just like the common sense things that I could have negotiated in English perfectly fine. I was like, oh wait, I no longer know the rules, and this is really it was really hard. The first move abroad when we were 24, we were newly married. I think that was a huge culture shock.
And how did you find your apartment? So it wasn't student housing. It was not provided by the university where your husband was
No, and
going.
that's a great point. So people who are coming over to Europe as students, student housing doesn't exist in the same way as it does in the US. And so especially like if you're a PhD student, like you are on your own to find housing. And at that point had gone through like it was like more expensive, especially like on our budget at that time, but you were able to get like furnished housing. And we were literally coming over with like, 4 knapsacks with the idea that we would like move into completely furnished housing right in the center of the city. We would do that, commit to that for 3 months, pay a premium for that. And we would use those 3 months to find like a permanent housing situation. And I think that also goes back to like the importance of networking, especially right now. Any major city that you're moving to, there is a major housing shortage. And a lot of times apartments are going up and they're not even getting posted. They're just going to, the friend or the neighbor of whoever. So it's important. Like we have really gotten like all of our apartments through our network, letting people know we're looking for something and, oh, okay, this person's moving. And that is like so, so important. And really expats a lot. You'll see like some of these really nice apartments, like they'll stay kind of in that expat community because they literally just get passed from one person to the next.
I think that's a great tip. And a good strategy too is giving yourself 3 months. Also getting to know an area. You may
Yep.
find something online and find something through a network and then commit to it and then hate the neighborhood or feel like it's not conducive to your lifestyle. So I think that's a great.
Absolutely. And I also say, like, when we were moving out of that temporary, so again, we show up at this apartment hoping it's like we're not being scammed. And they had this like whole protocol that they were going through, like checking, the drains and all these like details. And, we're so jet lagged. We're like, why are we doing like it's everything's fine. Everything's fine. Like we kind of had this American lens of like checking into our apartment. Like, yep, it's here. Okay, great. Bye. Like, why are you? So they had this like whole protocol and we were like so annoyed. Now, when we moved out of there, they wanted to do that same protocol. And I remember we got charged like 1,000 francs because the landlord said that the drain sounded different after we had lived there. And so I think like it's really important to understand culturally like some of these things. And so especially like in Switzerland, these like housing protocols are like very stressful. Everything really truly has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect and you're especially dealing with a landlord that's dealing with high turnover expats, they're going to make sure that they get some of your deposit back.
And is that all outlined like in a rental contract or are these just like
I'm sure it was all in German.
Fees could
I'm
be
sure,
willy-nilly?
I know. I mean, it's like a whole protocol and they do that whenever you, and this is not in every country, but I know it's very common in Germany. It's very common in Switzerland. Like they go through and they check literally the condition of everything. And if it's not perfect, they'll make a note that it's not perfect. And if it's not in return in the exact condition that you like moved into, you will you're on the hook. So making sure that you have the right insurance to cover any of these crazy things. If you lose a key, for example, they might have to change the locks of every tenant in that building. So it's not just your keys. So there's like a lot of things that just, again, culturally coming from the US and what we were used to with renting in the US, it was very, very different and still continues to be different.
Yeah. A lot of things you don't really think about. I mean,
Totally don't
yeah.
think about it. Like, yeah.
Now in Switzerland, is it similar to Germany where a lot of times the kitchens, light fixtures, everything are not included? Like
No, so that's a
rentals?
big difference between Germany and Switzerland. Germany, your kitchen isn't included. So when we moved to Berlin, we got a brand new apartment and we had to go and buy a kitchen. And then we had to live in our apartment. We had like this temporary kitchen set up in our apartment for a month before our kitchen. I mean, can you imagine like moving somewhere and then all of a sudden we're out of pocket like 10K for a kitchen that we had to buy? That was crazy. But in Switzerland, the apartments and houses come with kitchens, thankfully, but you do have to bring all your own light fixtures.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre.
Isn't it crazy?
I mean, I guess that you can put your own touch on things, but I mean, just a lot of times you see in rentals, it's like literally a wire hanging from the ceiling. Like, okay.
Yes, that actually is what it is. And I think it goes back to culturally, like people do tend to rent more in this part of the world than to buy. And so if you're going to rent for the next 30 years, it makes sense that you would want to have your own kitchen and really have it to your standard. But for expats, it means that you're either like having to pay out of pocket or you're paying a premium for like housing that is like furnished or already is coming with us, or you're buying a kitchen. Like when we left Berlin, we sold our kitchen to the new tenants.
Yeah, I bet
Yeah.
Facebook Marketplace or whatever the German equivalent of it is just a gold mine for
Yes.
kitchens, right?
Yes. I know. Yeah.
So walk me through your next move after you finished up in Switzerland the first time. Then the next step was Germany. Was it Berlin?
No. So actually,
No.
we left Switzerland at the end of 2016. At that point, we'd been in Switzerland for almost 6 years. We now had a daughter, and I was actually feeling really homesick for to be back with our parents. There was like a
Mm.
lot of guilt trip of like, yeah, you have your granddaughter, we can't see her, you're so far away, blah 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 blah. And so we actually moved back to New York with this idea that we moved to the capital region. So we were like in between my parents and my husband's parents so they could all come and see us and it would be great. Bought a house before we even landed. And we also wanted to adapt. And as two Americans living in Switzerland, like we really had to be resident in the US to be able to go through that process. And so we made this intentional move to go back. We went back, and I would say we didn't immediately regret it, but we were definitely like, okay, we're back into like the suburbia culture. We're back into I'm busy. We're not seeing people as much as we kind of thought we would see them. Maybe it just makes sense for us to live where we want to live and we'll see them when we see them. And so we got really lucky. Our adoption went really quickly. And as soon as it was finalized, my husband and I kind of like had a bet. We're like, which one of us is going to get a job out of here faster? And
Mm.
I got really lucky because I got a job at a tech startup in Berlin doing fintech. And so we moved the family to Berlin at the end of 2019, which
How did you
I mean,
find that job search? Like, how did you approach it?
so I actually didn't even apply. So this is a shout out for just being active and showing up on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I've actually not applied for a job since my job at PwC in 2012.
All
That was the last
networking.
time and it's now 2025. I've not applied for a job since because I am extremely specialized and I am constantly being reached out by recruiters, honestly. And I keep my LinkedIn profile active and I engage with that community. And so if you are looking and thinking about, find the recruiters in the countries that you want to be, especially if you're specialized. If you're in tech, if you do something special, like find local recruiters. So it was actually a European recruiter who reached out to me and said, we have this opportunity in Berlin. Would you be interested? And I was an interesting candidate for them because I was US, but I had already lived and worked abroad. So it just kind of all worked out like, and it moved very, very fast. I mean, I was in Berlin interviewing in April. I had an offer within that month. And then a whole family was on a plane moving there in August.
And did they sponsor the visa that time? So you
Yep.
had it all
Yep.
taken care of
So,
for you?
yeah. And one tip that I have there is they were happy to sponsor my visa, but I had done enough research to know there's different types of visas, and different
Mhm.
types of visas give you different types of rights. And that's a really important tip if you're moving abroad. Don't just accept what your employer is offering you because they were just like, we'll just give you like the basic visa. And I had done some research and I was like, actually, I would qualify for a highly compensated, highly specialized visa if we just did like a few more steps. And that would actually fast track me to potentially permanent residency or citizenship. And so let's go that route. And so because I pushed for it, that's the route they ended up going. And I'm very glad that they did that. It gave me a lot more flexibility to
And did
stay
your
in.
husband, did your family, was it all inclusive in this visa as well? Was he able to come over and your children as well on that visa, or did
Yep.
they have to get their own? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was all a family visa, and it was actually really lucky because my husband's job they didn't want to lose him, and so they just said, "We're actually also going to move you abroad to the German office," and
Oh,
they
nice.
they actually put him on a tax equalization contract, which we totally were not expecting, and so it actually ended up being this like huge, amazing kind of financial windfall for us to be able to live in Germany but pay a U.S. tax rate on his salary.
And I've never heard of that before. How does that work?
So that's how a lot of corporate expat contracts actually work.
Okay.
Is they will say, "Hey, we want to, the local office in Germany wants to borrow this technical employee from the US office. So we are going to kind of put them on a special expat contract." Those are very specific contracts. They're less than 5 years. They're not permanent contracts. You
Okay.
remain in paying into US Social Security. You remain receiving 401k contributions, paying into 401ks. And oftentimes, like the employer will do this kind of magical calculation. It's not magical. It's called a tax equalization calculation. TEQs.
Okay.
I used to do them all the time at work. So it's kind of cool to like see it all play out. in our own family, where they would just basically like figure out, okay, what would you pay in Germany? Okay, German tax rate is, 47%. Okay, but your New York tax rate was only going to be, 33%. So we'll cover the difference for
Ah,
you.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes
And
sense.
that's something to look for and to negotiate in a contract if you are going over at the foreign company's invitation. That's something that you really, really want, especially if you're moving to Europe or any other high tax country.
Okay. So let's go through Germany and your second foray into living abroad. What was it like the second time around? So compare and contrast what it was like going the second time and also Berlin to Zurich.
Yeah, so I knew from the get-go Berlin was never going to be my dream city, and I'll transparently say that. Like, I wanted to get abroad. I knew once we were back abroad, things would align again for us, but I just wanted to like get back to Europe. And so once we got there, it was terrible timing. We got there at the end of August, the kids started school, and then COVID hit hardcore
Mm,
in March. The lockdown in Germany was no joke. It was so serious. Like, we had landed this amazing apartment with literally a playground like across like a pathway, and the playgrounds were like locked down. You couldn't
mm,
do anything. It was so miserable. And as we were experiencing living through a pandemic in Germany with two young children, and this is with like we had a full-time nanny living with us. Like, we had a live-in nanny at this point. And it was still so miserable that I think we both realized like we cannot stay in Berlin. I didn't know how long this was going to go. I just really felt like the rules were not fair to families. Our daughter was going to school like 1 hour a week. I mean, it was just like none of it to me had made any sense. And trying to do it again, my husband and I are both working really intense jobs at this point. We had to make a change. So we actually Googled at that point. Like, I was like, well, we can move anywhere. My husband and I had both spent time in southern Germany in the Munich area. We knew we loved being down there. Like, we would drive from, 8 hours from Berlin down to Germany to get to the mountains, to get to the lakes, really where like our hearts were happy. Berlin is very flat. And so we just Googled like best place to live in Germany. And we ended up in this town called Starnberg, which is just outside of Munich. And was listed as one of the best places to move. And there was like, we get there, there's a lake, and then there's the Alps. And honestly, it just reminded me of Zurich. Like, but it was maybe a town of 50,000 people. You could get into Munich within 30 minutes. And we hired an agent to do a housing search for us. And we found a place to live, and we were like, we're just moving here. Our jobs are now fully remote, which they weren't
mm,
when we had first moved to Germany. And I was like, let's just pay whatever it costs, because I knew in my heart that Berlin was not our place. It's a great
mm.
place for a lot of people, but for us at that point in our lives, it was like not our place. And that was the best decision we ever made, was to like just take that leap. We got this great apartment, this great house. We could walk to the lake. Our kids went from the international schools to local schools. Like, I felt like we could really like integrate more into the community. Also, as time passed, obviously the restrictions from COVID were, starting to lift, and like life started to return. But I would say we were there for 2 full years. And then my husband got his dream job in Zurich. So going back to the university, but now to work there. And so we loved it so much that we had him commuting back and forth between Zurich and Munich for a whole year, just so we could basically give our kids one more year in this really,
Mm.
truly magical place. And still, our family, it's been over 3 years since we moved there, and our family, we still go back all the time. We still have friends there. We love this place. It's really special to us.
I think that's a great that whole full circle moment, but it's a great testament to nothing is permanent. And I'm curious, do you think that had you been in Berlin in a different time, not a COVID timeframe, would it have been a different perspective? Or do you think you were just meant to be in this other town and that was just kind of a roundabout way of getting?
I think I would have had a very different perspective if we hadn't like the point of time where we wasn't COVID, we were in temporary housing, looking for a permanent place, waiting for our kitchen. Our kids started in local schools. The schools were terrible. We had to switch them to
Mm,
international schools. So it was like we basically got settled after like a lot of chaos, only to then be hit by COVID. And
mm,
it was just kind of at that point, like, I was like, this place is not salvageable. Like, for me, there's too much like negative energy here. Like, I just don't want this to be our place. I think it's a great place for anyone who's just looking for a different vibe, especially if you don't have kids and you have a lot of freedom and
mhm,
flexibility. It's a great city. And I go back every year. I love going back. I just am like, it was never my city. And I think I also got really spoiled in Zurich because I am used to like really clean cities. And so
mm,
even Berlin, it's not even that dirty of a city, but like there's trash everywhere. And they're like, you go to an elevator, it smells like, someone slept in there the last night. And it's just like, Zurich had rubbed off on me enough to that point where Berlin was a bit of like, oh, okay, like this is just not to my standard. And I am a little too uptight to be in Berlin at this point.
And what was the town that you actually lived in Germany? What was it called again?
So it's just outside of Munich. It's called Starnberg.
Starnberg. And how many people lived in there? Like, give me a
50,
little, paint a picture
50,
of what it's like.
50,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And it's
very
yeah.
small. How was that integrating into the community there versus in a big city? Was it
So it was
easier?
actually really easy because Starnberg is also home to the Munich International School. So it has a bit more of an international flair than like another similar sized town in the middle of Germany. So there are like more international families kind of living there. And so it felt really natural to just kind of like be there. Our kids integrated really quickly. We very easily made friends there. I mean, it was probably one of our easiest transitions. We made a lot of transitions, and that was probably one of our easiest transitions there.
Okay. And at this point, are you fluent in German or
Oh my
like
gosh,
how's the language?
I wish. So kids are fluent in German and now Swiss German. My husband's German is really good. My German is still, I feel like still like restaurant level. I can read all the documents that I need to read because I've been reading them for so long. So like tax and financial documents and statements, it's super easy for me. But I would say if I had to navigate professionally in German, it would still be a struggle. It would still be a struggle. And that's kind of on me. I think it's also with like the life that I only work with US expats and their families. And so I literally spend all day speaking English. And so I do take German classes endlessly. I'm like an endless learner of German. But honestly, I joke with my husband, and I'm not even joking. I should really get a job in like a local cafe a couple hours a week because I feel like my whole world is still a bit in a bubble. And a lot of expats end up in these expat bubbles. I think my career has just kind of naturally put me in this huge kind of expat bubble where my husband's able to go out and he's working and able to communicate in German. Even if the professional language is English, he can choose now to like speak in German with his colleagues. And I think that's like so awesome for him. But I'm kind of here in my home office speaking English all day and then trying to like watch TV in German at night.
Yeah. I would imagine as well being in pretty international places between Zurich and Berlin and being exposed to so many different languages. English is kind of the common language with a lot of different people and different, so many businesses and hubs being in those cities. It probably makes it a little bit easier to
Yeah. And I would say
skate
like,
by, I guess.
yeah, I think for sure. And I think in Germany, it was easier for me to learn and speak German locally, especially when we lived in Starnberg. Like I was feeling very confident about navigating in German. When we moved back to Switzerland, all of a sudden I was like, wait, I don't understand German anymore because it's Swiss German and it's like a completely different dialect. And I went from like when we crossed the border and we're in Germany, I'm like, I can understand everything. Like I feel like I know what's going on. And here, I think a lot of people socially in Switzerland, they're more comfortable speaking in English than they are speaking in High German, which is what you would speak in German. And so I do love being in Germany because it's like the German is so crisp and I can understand everything. I feel more confident speaking. Here, I still just feel very insecure. And someone's like, well, you just need to learn Swiss German. And for me, it's like, okay, I feel like I need to like get to like a very fluent level of High German to then add on like this dialect. Yeah, it's one of my great challenges that I hope to continue to work on.
Let's talk a little bit about raising kids in a foreign country. How have you found it? Between navigating schools and healthcare and friendships and other parents. Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we moved back when our daughter was 4. And so she went into pre-K and then she did kindergarten and first grade in the US. And then we moved back to Europe. And so I had like a little bit of insights. And I mean, when we moved back to New York, we bought for our school district. We bought into one of the best school districts. Like that's what you have to do, right? In the US, you have to buy for your school district. And it was also like just around the corner. Like our school was just around the corner. And I was like, oh, this could be so great because it's just gonna be like Switzerland where you can just like walk to school. And then like the reality of that played out when I realized like, oh wait, there's no sidewalks and people don't even like really stop on these like teeny tiny country roads. They're like plowing through. I mean, it's a car world. Like everything in the US is all about cars. And so our daughter ended up taking the bus for like 3 minutes a day each way because it was just like so ridiculous. And I remember when we got the note saying that they were going to do, the active shooter drills.
Mm,
And I just got so upset. Like, my kindergartner has to go to school and practice, like, to not get shot at. Like,
yeah.
that is a different reality than the one that I've been living in. And I don't like this reality as much. And then there was just like a lot of other things that I found. Like, even though my daughter was like in elementary school, I noticed like all of her peers are doing like 27 different activities. There's like the Girl Scouts and the soccer and the travel, this and the gymnastics. I mean, it was like the kids' schedule in the US. It's so overwhelming. I literally don't know how parents do it. On top of like all the parents are also working full time.
Yeah.
So I understood when I tried to like connect with other parents, I understood why they're like, I'm busy. And I'm like, yeah, like everyone is so busy here. Like you don't really even get to live. You're so busy.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of forced into this trap of like convenience, right? It has to be convenient because you're so busy.
Mhm.
And so again, I knew very quickly like this lifestyle is like not going to work for us. And so when we went back to Germany, that was something I was really eager to get back to. How do we get back to walking, commuting to schools and places that we go all the time on public transportation? So we sold our car. We didn't have a car when we lived in Berlin. We didn't need a car when we lived in Berlin. And then now our kids have been in local school in Switzerland for 3 years. I think I want to be honest, like our daughter she fits in a box. And in Europe, people love people who fit in boxes. And I think that's
Mm,
a really important thing to just say. Our daughter fits the book. She's a strong student. She fits in kind of wherever she goes. Like she can easily adapt. Our son has some special needs, and there have been some really hard one challenges with him,
mm,
getting him services that he needs to access and doing that. It doesn't take months. It takes literally years, right?
mm,
You really like the system is not set up for people who maybe need something a little bit outside of the box. The whole system is set up differently. The system here is set up so that you only maybe have one working parent, or if you have two working parents, you have grandparents who live
mm,
in this, in the neighborhood because all the kids are coming home for lunch every day. So it's different, but at the same time, I love being here because my kids can walk to school, they can bike to school. That is the expectation. They can walk around town. Our town here, we just live just outside of Zurich. So we're like 15 minutes outside of the center of Zurich, and it's about a town of 50,000 people. Our kids walk all over town, and I feel like totally safe.
mm,
And to me, that is like the biggest luxury in the world. The biggest feeling of wealth is the fact that like I feel safe all the time. My daughter is 13. She does not have a cell phone. And I will send her
mm.
to Zurich by herself and just be like, okay, like write down your directions, right? We're back in like the 90s. Oh, and if you get lost, just come home and we'll look at your directions again. Like, that to me, that is just so that's what I want. That's what I
Yeah.
value.
Yeah, that's priceless. That's priceless.
Mhm.
And is that common? Not having cell phones and really kind of having more of a childhood than some of the United States even have anymore.
So I would say kids here definitely get cell phones later. I would say our family is still weird. Because, at 13, most of her friends have cell phones or a smartwatch or some way to contact family members.
Mhm.
I am just like, how far can we push this?
Yeah.
Um,
Good for you.
I just don't see right. If she needs one, I'll get her one. I don't see the need yet.
Okay. Okay. I want to ask a little bit about you and your husband both have very prominent careers, very high profile careers. You're also navigating family and living in a foreign country. How do you balance it all?
We don't. We absolutely don't. And I think it's like really important. The 3 years we lived in Germany, when we moved when our son was 2, we left when our son was 5. Those 3 years we had full time live in help. Like that is a luxury that most people don't get to have. And
Mhm.
honestly, we could not have gotten through those years without that level of support. And when we moved here, we moved back to Switzerland and we no longer had someone living with us. I still miss my son is 8 now, and I'm still like, remember when we like, that was so nice. Like, I loved it. And so, there's a lot of things that get sacrificed, and I talk a lot about work balance because honestly, I need a constant reminder of work-life balance.
Mm.
It's like I don't just, have a job. I have a company. I have 2 companies, and that requires so much time and energy. I love what I do, but does it mean that I have like time to go hang out socially all the time? No. Like I'm kind of like in my little field, but at the same time, like I remember growing up, my dad worked all the time. And my parents were really big into family. And I remember, but my dad worked all the time. And I think about that. Yes, we have intense jobs, but in a lot of ways, I feel like we're way more present with our children. We have more intentional time. The kids here are basically have a 2-week break every 8 weeks.
Hmm.
And so you just have a lot more intentional time with your children. They only have 5-week break in the summer, so we're usually taking at least 2 or 3 weeks off as a family. And so I feel like, yeah, our life is really intense, but the time we have with our kids is very, very intentional.
Do you find you in your career, do you work around kind of the holidays in Europe versus the US? Because you deal with primarily expats and United States people, right? Or Americans.
Yeah, there is sometimes like we have all of our holidays here like in the spring. There's like so many holidays in the spring and it's like just annoying because we also have like a lot of tax deadlines, which tie to, when we're doing a lot of heavy lifting on our financial planning work. And then here all the holidays like are in the fall. So there's some mismatch, but I mean overall everything here closes down for 2 weeks over Christmas and New Year's, so that it pretty much aligns very well. And then we take some time off in the summers. I mean, there's a lot of families who take a vacation every 8 weeks for 1 or 2 weeks. We don't do that, but I do think like my job, I can find more and more flexibility now that I'm going, year 3 is finished, I'm going into year 4. I'm at a place, where I have a team. I financially we could take a little bit more time and flexibility, but yeah, transparently the last 3 years, it's like I think the first 2 years I didn't take a vacation. I just was like, I'll bring my laptop on this vacation.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned your two companies. Tell us about what you do and who you serve.
Yeah. So first, I have Connected Financial Planning, and that is a cross border financial planning for US expats, current and aspiring, who are primarily living in or based in Central Europe. I don't serve all European countries, but that's kind of who I kind of classically serve. So that's looking at everyone very like from a 10,000 foot view, right? Where do you want to go to school? Where are we doing estate planning? Where are your parents based? Are we, are there inheritance tax issues? Where do you want to retire? If you're on an expat contract, we're moving from here to here, and then where are we moving next? So that's a lot of the work that we do there. And I would say we tend to work with, executives in tech and pharma. I kind of got so busy and full there that I realized that there was still like a massive space in like the education side of things. And so my passion project is a podcast and a platform right now that's called Passport to Wealth. And that is really taking the time to interview experts who are also doing financial planning or tax work and estate planning work or relocation and visa stuff. So really focusing on technical topics and trying to dive into that so that people who maybe can't afford to work with me or another financial planner at least have enough knowledge to say, oof, that's a red flag. I might actually need to ask a professional a question before I just go and do this. Because there's like this kind of a huge barrier, right? It's like, I'm moving abroad. Who do I need on my team? And
Hmm.
oftentimes it's so many people. And that's like really overwhelming if you've never worked with professionals. You've always self prepared your tax returns. You've, figured out how to, make investments, like find a housing, like things can change if you are moving for a good job, you're making good money, you have accumulated significant assets, the stakes are pretty high to get it right. Again, especially if you're moving into a high tax country, or even if you're moving to a low tax country, taking advantage of the planning opportunities that are there while you are outside of the US, I think are really interesting. If you're just moving for as a student and you have no money, stakes are pretty low, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't really screw up too much, but you should still kind of be aware because I talk to so many people who they move abroad for their studies and then they stay, they fall in love and they stay.
Yep.
And at some point they are making money, but they're still tied to the US tax and financial system. And that really puts a lot of handcuffs on what you can do. I call it like walking a tightrope, wearing handcuffs, and trying to balance it. Does the local country incentivize you to do versus does the US allow you to do? And I would argue it is not logical. The rules do not make sense. They do not make sense. And so if you approach this with common sense would say, it's like literally, I can tell you there is no common sense in a lot of the rules.
Can we go back to connected financial planning? What countries do you serve so that we
Yeah.
can get a clear
Yeah.
outline of?
So my core countries are really the countries that I've lived and worked in and built my network in. And I think that's
Okay.
so important, right? We refer out more clients than we take on because
Mm,
I truly believe that if you are going to take the time and the money to hire a cross-border financial planner, they better actually know what they're doing in the country that you're going to. So my
hmm.
core countries are really Germany and Switzerland. And we
Okay.
do a little bit of Portugal. And we have some of the smaller countries where there really are no experts that are, dedicated to those smaller European countries. But like, I don't do Spain. I don't do France. I don't do the UK. I don't do Italy. There's so many countries that I live, an hour from that I don't do because, again, you have to take all of the US rules, which we all know are ever changing,
Yes.
and then layer them over the local rules and figure out what works and what doesn't. And to me, tax becomes such a huge pillar of your plan for tax planning purposes. And so, if you can only afford one person, hire a really good international accountant. And if you have enough money, then it makes sense to bring in a team and have a cross border advisor as well. But make sure they actually know about the country you're moving to. Because I have talked to a lot of advisors who are like, I just said I would help. I would just do their US stuff. Okay, well, yeah, but they live in another country and their tax rate is twice what they're paying in the US. So, like, what are you doing? So,
Right.
it's just important to understand what those traps potentially are.
You've mentioned team a couple of times. So, in your opinion, someone who is either looking to move abroad or is moving abroad or has moved abroad, what are the essentials? Who do they need on the team, on their team?
First person that you're hiring is a good US tax person. And that's with the understanding that you know what your immigration pathway is, right? Like if you don't even know
Okay.
what your immigration pathway is, take a step back because I'm having a lot of calls with people right now who, they have a US passport. They're used to the freedom of just being able to travel very easily, especially in Europe. And it's really important. Just being able to travel in Europe or be in Europe for 90 days,
Yeah.
that does not give you any rights to work in that country. So,
Yeah.
yeah, my company lets me work remotely wherever I am. Like, you have to be careful, right? So, first, we need to understand where are we going? How are we going? What is our tax residency going to be once we get there? And then, so for me, first person is a good international accountant. A lot of people will be like, "Oh, I really like, my cousin Dwayne in Chicago. They've done great work for my family." Awesome. What do they know about international? Like,
Yeah.
because I would argue that international within like the broad stroke of tax, international is really a special niche. We have different forms that we're filing, we have to understand the treaties and how do they intersect. We are looking at stuff that most tax preparers never even consider. Honestly. And so if you've been self-preparing with H&R Block, the year, especially the year that you move, that first year is so, so important to get that right. Are we ending residency in a state, right? Are
Mhm.
we, going to be filing perpetually in this, the state? It's really important to get that first year right. And then maybe your first full year. And at least then you have a template. You have a template if you're like really gung ho of like self preparing. It's not cheap. So then you have a template and you can kind of work on learning how to self prepare your tax return if you really, really want to do that.
And who else should they have on their team?
Okay, so we've got, your relocation team, your visa team, your tax team, financial planner. And I would say this makes sense if you are either making a lot of money or you have a lot of money. So
Hmm.
I would say like when I think about a lot of the clients that we're working with, right, we've maybe amassed, close to 1 million and we're in our, late 30s, 40s, right? Or we are 35 and we're making 1 million a
Hmm.
year and we're saving, 100 to $250,000 a year and we're kind of like on a super speed. And so I think like to me that it starts to become the level where it warrants having a cross-border financial planner. If someone calls me and they're 65 and they've only saved 1 million, that's a harder sell for me and for them because I don't know if I can add so much value that it
Hmm.
makes sense for them to hire me at that point. So we're really looking, I think, at more of like the kind of emerging wealth or you've amassed several million and now we're preparing for retirement. And that's kind of the balance that I feel like at those numbers, I know we can bring value. We can add a lot of value because the impacts that we make are going to, be exponential on tax planning and retirement planning.
Okay. What are the biggest red flags you see when people are moving abroad? You mentioned red flags earlier, so I'm just curious, like, what are they?
Yeah, I think again, I find so many. I think I saw a statistic, and you might know this better than me, Shannon, but it was something like 60% of Americans right now are thinking about or Googling like how to leave the US right now, but only
Hmm.
50% of Americans have a passport, right? So like the math isn't always mathing. We kind of have this like idea that we can just go and cowboy our way through anything.
Yeah.
different countries have different cultures around different processes and bureaucracy. Like, right, if you go to a highly regulated part of the world, like Europe, right, there's a lot more regulation, a lot more rules about how you could enter, how you can work. There's a lot more process. Now, there's other countries where it's very easy to get into, right, and have completely different considerations. So I get a lot of calls for people who are like, I want to move abroad. And it's like, okay, but where? And so the first thing I always tell people is just start with, traveling. Get out and travel and figure out where you would even want to go. What weather works for you? Do you want to be in the city? Do you want to be in the country? Language considerations, cultural considerations. Like, really just don't assume that you're going to solve all your problems by leaving the US. You will not. Um, but you need to kind of figure out the why am I wanting to move, and then where do I want to move. I really think people often miss that first step.
Is there anything you miss about living in the States?
Our families, I do. I mean, we get to see our families a couple of times a year. That's heartbreaking, right? Our
Mhm.
kids are not growing up with their cousins, they're not growing up with their grandparents close by. I hate that, but I think my husband and I have just we've just determined, like, the rest of the things outweigh that piece for us at this point in our life, that I am now thinking to when my kids are going to be having kids. And I'm like, am I building up my financial plan? So if my kids decide they want to go live halfway across the world, am I going to have the flexibility in my retirement to go and do that? Like, that is now like the way I think about it. It's not about, well, they're just going to have to come and see me. It's like, no, I am
Mm.
thinking, where are my grandkids going to be and how am I going to be able to see them? Not, you just have to come see me.
Yeah, and I think many people in America don't live in the same state anyway. Like
Hmm.
I'm a 2.5 hour plane flight away from my grandkids, and I only see them a couple times a year as well. So, I mean, what's another 8 hour, 8 hours in a plane flight, right?
That's what I determined. I was kind of like, you know what? When we lived in New York, my parents came every month for a weekend, every month. And it was amazing. And I really only felt
Mm,
guilty about leaving them. But other people would be like, oh, well, come see us. And I'm just like, I'm sick of traveling. Like, I just need space. And if you still can't make the time and the space to see us, then yeah, what's an 8-hour flight for you? Like, you'll
yeah,
make it happen when it's important to you.
yeah. What would you tell anyone who is thinking of moving abroad? What's your biggest piece of advice, or what do you want to tell that person who's listening to this podcast on the fence, not sure what they want to do? Go for it.
Yeah, I really feel like people need to follow their dreams. I mean, like, make a plan and make it work. Like, I really truly believe you can make anything work. Like, even if you're on a budget, even if you're not some, specialized tech worker who can get like some, highly specialized visa, there are so many opportunities to go abroad that if your soul is telling you you need to go, like, you need to go. And you said this before, nothing is permanent, right? You can always pivot and change. And I think, like, that's another reality that I feel like I've unlocked, is this idea of, like, my whole life is just one big A/B test, right? We're trying this, we're trying that. And don't be stuck. Like, you need to stay flexible and just go with what's happening and just realize, like, okay, this isn't working. So let's stop doing this. Take the risk that something else is going to be better. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's worse. But then you just have to keep pivoting. You just don't get yourself stuck.
Yeah, there's always growth in, even if you do make quote unquote the wrong decision, right? It's a
Yep.
learning opportunity, and it's showing you where you want to be and where you should be. So,
Yes.
any other parting words
Absolutely.
you want to leave for us?
I mean, just do it, right? Just do it. And I think, like, your podcast is such a great resource. Everything that you're building is such a great resource to give people that view into what it could be. And I think there's a lot of great resources like that where you can just start to get that view of what it's going to be and know other people have done it before. Like, you're not the first person moving abroad. Like, you're not that special. I hate to tell you that. You can do it if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it, you'll always have an excuse why you can't. But if you actually want to do it, you
Yes.
can do it.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback on the podcast. Yours as well. I think that's the next step for people, really, is go listen to Passport to Wealth. You have interviews, and you have information. So people who kind of want to get a little bit more serious and get into the nuts and bolts and listen from other experts, I think that's a great resource as well. So
Oh,
where can
thank you.
everybody
I
find you
appreciate the
on
plug.
where can everybody find you online?
Yeah, so I'm super active on LinkedIn. That, I would say, is where I'm most active. I write and talk about expat issues every day. That's like my favorite thing to do. And then we obviously have the podcast, so passporttowealth.com. But we're also on all the major platforms. You can find us on YouTube as well, Passport to Wealth Official on YouTube. But yeah, I would say, like, to me, like, that's the place to really find us and to dig into I'm considering moving abroad is the Passport to Wealth brand.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I love your story. I love that you shared it so openly, and you're just so fun to listen to. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening and spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow the show and leave a review. It will really help others find us. And if you're dreaming about a life abroad or already living it, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram at bargainhomesabroad or on our website, www.bargainhomesabroad.co. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and I'll see you back in the armchair soon. Bye-bye.